In the sun-drenched vineyards of Saint-Véran, a brutal murder shatters the peace of Château Lavigne. Marcel Fournier, a celebrated winemaker, lies dead in his cellar, a shattered barrel and a bloodied mallet the only clues. Enter Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster from St. Mary Mead, whose quiet demeanor hides a relentless mind. As whispers of ambition, greed, and old grudges swirl among the assistant, a cunning buyer, a bitter rival, and a loyal worker, Miss Marple unravels a web of secrets. Mud on a boot, a buried cloth, a fleeting glance. Every detail points to a killer hiding in plain sight. In a village where wine flows like truth, only one truth will prevail. Who struck the fatal blow, and why? Chapter 1. The Cellar of Secrets. The village of Saint-Véran drowsed under the golden haze of a Bordeaux summer, its cobbled lanes winding between stone cottages and sprawling vineyards. Château Lavigne, a grand estate perched on a gentle hill, was the jewel of the region, its wines prized from Paris to London. Yet, on this August evening, a chill hung over the chateau, untouched by the sun's lingering warmth. Miss Jane Marple, summoned from her quiet life in St. Mary Mead by a letter from Inspector Dubois, stepped carefully into the estate's ancient cellar. Her black lace-up shoes tapped softly on the stone steps, and her gloved hand clutched a shawl against the damp air. The scent of oak barrels and fermenting grapes was rich, but a sharper, metallic tang cut through it, a scent that spoke of death. At the cellar's heart, lit by the flicker of a single lantern, lay Marcel Fournier, the master winemaker. His body sprawled beside a shattered barrel, its splintered staves glistening with spilled wine that pooled like blood. A single, brutal blow had caved in the side of his skull, and his sightless eyes stared at the vaulted ceiling. Inspector Dubois, a sturdy man with a mustache that bristled with Gallic pride, stood over the corpse, his notebook open. "A bad business, Mademoiselle Marple," he said, his voice low. Marcel was a genius with the vines, but not, it seems, with people. Miss Marple, her white curls tucked beneath a modest hat, bent slightly to study the scene. Her eyes, bright and sharp despite her age, took in the details. The overturned stool, the smear of mud on the floor, the glint of a broken wine glass near Marcel's hand. "A man does not die like this by chance," she murmured, her tone as gentle as a vicar's sermon. "There is purpose here, Inspector, a purpose born of passion or greed, or perhaps both." Her knitting bag hung at her side, the faint click of needles within it a counterpoint to the silence of the cellar. Dubois gestured to his men, who were cataloging the scene with the efficiency of a harvest crew. "We have 4 suspects," he said. "Pierre Lemoine, Marcel's assistant, who was seen in the cellar an hour before the body was found. Madame Claire Dubois, no kin of mine, a wine buyer from Paris, who argued with Marcel yesterday. Monsieur Roland Beaumont, a rival vintner with a grudge as old as these hills, and Etienne Dubois, a worker here, and, I confess, a distant cousin. He was fetching tools in the cellar last night." His brow furrowed. "Each had opportunity, mademoiselle, but motive? That is less clear." Miss Marple straightened, her gaze lingering on the shattered barrel. Its contents had soaked Marcel's coat, staining it a deeper red than his blood. "Clarity comes with patience, Inspector," she said. "In my village, I once knew a grocer who seemed the soul of kindness, yet he poisoned his wife over a matter of pride. People wear masks, you see, but they slip in the smallest ways." She stepped toward the cellar's side door, noting a faint scuff of dirt on the threshold. "This mud," she said, almost to herself. "Is it common here?" Dubois shook his head. "The cellar is swept daily. Marcel was particular about cleanliness." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, the kind that might greet a neighbor's gossip over tea. "Then someone brought it in," she said, "and someone perhaps had reason to tread carefully." As the inspector barked orders to his men, Miss Marple's mind turned to the suspects. Pierre, the assistant, would know the cellar's nooks as well as Marcel. Madame Claire, with her city polish, might hide a ruthless streak beneath her elegance. Roland, the rival, carried the weight of envy, a motive as old as Cain. And Etienne, the worker, quiet men, she knew, could harbor storms. "Tell me, Inspector," she said, turning to him, "who found the body?" "The housekeeper, Madame Lefebvre," Dubois replied. "She came to fetch a bottle for dinner and screamed the house down." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. Housekeepers, in her experience, saw more than they said. "I should like to speak with her," she said, "and perhaps take a turn about the vineyard. The truth, you know, often lies in what is not said." Dubois escorted her up the stone steps, the cellar's gloom giving way to the soft glow of the chateau's hall. Miss Marple glanced back at the shadowed scene below, where Marcel's life had ended in violence. "A vineyard," she mused, "is like a village. It thrives on care, but it also hides its thorns." With that, she stepped into the evening light, her mind already weaving the threads of Saint Véran's secrets. Chapter 2. The assistant's ambition. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room of Chateau Lavigne, her small, neat figure almost lost in the plush velvet of an overstuffed armchair. The room was a study in faded grandeur. Heavy tapestries adorned the walls, their threads depicting pastoral scenes of grape harvests long past, while a chandelier cast a soft golden light over a mahogany table, polished to a mirror's gleam. Outside, the Bordeaux sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the vineyard in hues of amber and rose. Miss Marple's hands rested lightly on her knitting bag, though she had not yet drawn out her needles. Her eyes, bright and bird-like, fixed on Pierre Lemoine, the assistant winemaker, who stood before her, shifting from one foot to the other like a schoolboy called to account. Pierre was a lean young man, no more than 30, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair that fell untidily over his brow. His hands stained faintly, purple from years of handling grapes, twisted together as he spoke. "I don't know why you're looking at me like that, mademoiselle," he said, his voice carrying a defensive edge. "I worked for Marcel for 5 years. He was like a father to me. Why would I hurt him?" The words came too quickly, as if rehearsed, and Miss Marple noted the way his gaze flickered to the window, avoiding her steady scrutiny. Inspector Dubois, standing near the fireplace with his notebook in hand, cleared his throat. "Pierre was seen in the cellar at 9 o'clock last night," he said, his mustache twitching with the weight of the fact. "An hour before Madame Lefebvre found the body. You told my officer you were checking the fermentation vats, but no one else was there to confirm it." His tone was not accusing, merely factual, but Pierre's shoulders stiffened all the same. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression as mild as if she were discussing the weather over tea in St. Mary Mead. "Checking the vats," she said softly, "is important work, I'm sure. But at such an hour? Most unusual, Monsieur Lemoine. In my village, I recall a young man, Tompkins, his name was, who was always tending to the vicar's garden at odd times. It turned out he was hiding stolen silver in the rose beds. Her voice was gentle, almost conversational, but Pierre's face flushed a shade darker than the chateau's finest claret. I had to check the vats, Pierre insisted, his hands clenching. Marcel was particular about the temperature, a degree too warm, and the wine could spoil. He trusted me to oversee it. He paused, then added, "Besides, I wasn't the only one about that night. Others were seen near the cellar, Madame Claire, for one." Miss Marple's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "Indeed," she said, "and we shall speak to them all in time. But let us stay with you for now, Monsieur Lemoine. You say Marcel was like a father, yet fathers and sons do not always agree. I understand he recently refused to promote you to head winemaker, despite your years of service. That must have been disappointing." Pierre's eyes narrowed, and for a moment a flash of something, anger perhaps, or fear, crossed his face. "Who told you that?" he demanded, then caught himself, lowering his voice. "It's true, he didn't promote me. Said I wasn't ready, that I needed more time to learn the craft. But I didn't resent him for it. I respected his judgment." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the handle of her knitting bag, as if considering whether to begin her work. "Respect is a fine thing," she said, "but ambition is a restless companion. I once knew a girl in St. Mary Mead, Lucy, her name was, who dreamed of being a governess. She worked tirelessly, but when the position went to another, her heart turned bitter. She didn't do anything dreadful, of course, but she might have, given time." Her tone was light, but her eyes held Pierre's, unyielding. Inspector Dubois interjected, flipping a page in his notebook. "There's more, mademoiselle. One of the workers overheard Pierre arguing with Marcel 2 days ago in the vineyard, something about fairness and promises broken." "Care to explain that, Pierre?" Pierre's jaw tightened, and he ran a hand through his hair, leaving it more disheveled. "It was nothing," he said. "Just a disagreement. Marcel promised me a chance to lead a new vintage, then changed his mind. Said the buyers wanted his name on the label, not mine. I was angry, yes, but I didn't kill him over it. I went to the cellar to work, not to do that." His voice faltered, and he looked away toward the tapestries, as if their woven vines might offer escape. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but probing, like a needle through fabric. "And this work in the cellar, Monsieur Lemoine, what exactly did it involve? You were alone, you say, with no one to see you. A man might do many things in such solitude." She paused, letting the silence press against him. "In my experience, people are rarely where they shouldn't be without reason." Pierre's hands stilled, and he met her gaze at last, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "I was adjusting the vats," he said. "The Pinot Noir was fermenting too quickly. I took readings, made notes, that's all." He reached into his pocket and produced a small notebook, its pages smudged with ink and grape juice. "Here, see for yourself. I logged the temperatures." Inspector Dubois took the notebook, flipping through it with a frown. "Detailed enough," he admitted, "but it proves nothing about the time of the murder. You could have written this earlier or later." He handed the notebook to Miss Marple, who examined it with care, her fingers tracing the cramped handwriting. The entries were meticulous, noting temperatures and times down to the minute, but something about the ink's consistency caught her eye. The final entry, dated 9 o'clock, seemed fresher, as if written in haste. "Very thorough," she said, returning the notebook to Pierre. You take your work seriously, Monsieur Lemoine. Yet I wonder, did you see anyone else in the cellar that night? Madame Claire, perhaps? Or Monsieur Beaumont? Even a shadow might tell us something. Pierre hesitated, his fingers tightening on the notebook. I thought I heard footsteps near the side door, but I saw no one. I was focused on my work. His voice was steady, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted to the door as if expecting an interruption. The drawing-room door creaked open, and Madame Lefebvre, the housekeeper, entered with a tray of tea. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from the shock of finding Marcel's body. She set the tray down with a clatter, and Miss Marple observed her closely. Housekeepers, in her experience, were the silent sentinels of any household, seeing what others missed. "Madame Lefebvre," she said kindly, "you must be terribly shaken. Tell me, did you often see Monsieur Lemoine in the cellar at such late hours?" The housekeeper's hands trembled as she poured tea, the china cup rattling against its saucer. "Pierre was often there," she said, her voice low. "Marcel trusted him with the wines, more than anyone. But last night, I saw him leave the cellar just after 9, looking agitated. He didn't see me. I was in the kitchen, fetching water." She glanced at Pierre, then away, as if afraid of saying too much. Pierre's face darkened. "Agitated? I was tired, that's all. I'd been working all day." He turned to Miss Marple, his tone pleading. "You don't understand, mademoiselle. Marcel was hard, yes, but he was teaching me. I wanted to learn, to make something of myself. Killing him would ruin everything." Miss Marple sipped her tea, the delicate aroma of chamomile steadying her thoughts. "Ruination," she said, "comes in many forms. In St. Mary Mead, there was a young man, James, his name was, who wanted to inherit his uncle's shop. He didn't kill, but he schemed, and scheming can lead to darker paths." She set her cup down, her eyes never leaving Pierre. "You wanted more than Marcel was willing to give, didn't you? A chance to prove yourself, perhaps to take his place?" Pierre's mouth opened, then closed, as if words had failed him. Inspector Dubois stepped forward, his voice firm. "We found a letter in Marcel's study, Pierre, addressed to you. It said he planned to bring in an outsider to oversee the next vintage. That must have stung." Pierre's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked younger, almost boyish. "He didn't tell me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found out yesterday, during our argument. He said I wasn't ready, that I'd never be ready, but I didn't kill him. I swear it." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. "Swearing is all very well," she said, "but truth has a way of rising, like cream in a churn. Tell me, Monsieur Lemoine, did you touch anything in the cellar besides the vats? The broken barrel, perhaps, or the mallet that's missing from the toolbox?" Pierre's eyes widened, and he shook his head vehemently. "No, nothing like that. I didn't even notice the mallet was gone." But his voice cracked, and Miss Marple's keen ears caught the note of panic. She made a mental note of it, as she did of the faint smudge of mud on the hem of Pierre's trousers, barely visible in the dim light. The interview ended shortly after, with Pierre dismissed to his quarters under the watchful eye of a gendarme. Inspector Dubois turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. "He's hiding something," he said. "That notebook, those late hours, it doesn't add up. But is it murder?" Miss Marple gathered her shawl, her movements deliberate. "Not yet, Inspector," she said. "Pierre is ambitious, yes, and ambition can be a dangerous spark. But we must look at the others. Madame Claire, Monsieur Beaumont, Etienne. Each has their own secrets, and secrets, like grapes, ripen in their own time. She paused at the door, her eyes drifting to the tapestries, where a woven figure crushed grapes underfoot. In my village, she added, there was a baker who swore he'd never harm his rival, yet his rival's oven mysteriously caught fire. Pierre may not have struck the blow, but he knows more than he says. As she stepped into the corridor, the chateau's silence pressed around her, broken only by the distant hum of cicadas. The vineyard stretched beyond the windows, its rows of vines orderly, yet somehow ominous, as if guarding the truth of Marcel's death. Miss Marple's mind turned to the cellar, to the mud on the floor and the shattered barrel. Pierre's ambition was clear, but was it motive enough for murder? Or was he, like so many in St. Mary Mead, merely a piece of a larger puzzle, one that would require all her patience to solve? She resolved to speak with Madame Lefebvre again, and perhaps to walk the vineyard paths where Pierre and Marcel had argued. The truth, she knew, lay not just in words but in the small things, the glance, the gesture, the stain that others overlooked. With a final glance at the drawing room, she moved toward the staircase, her steps as measured as the ticking of a clock, each one bringing her closer to the heart of Saint Véran's mystery. Chapter 3. The Buyer's Bargain. Miss Jane Marple sat at a small polished table in the conservatory of Chateau Lavigne, where the morning light streamed through tall glass panes, bathing the room in a soft, green-tinted glow. Potted ferns and climbing ivy lent the space a sense of cultivated wildness, a contrast to the ordered rows of the vineyard beyond. Her knitting bag rested at her feet, untouched, as she observed Madame Claire Dubois, the Parisian wine buyer, who stood before her with the poise of a woman accustomed to commanding attention. Claire was in her late 40s, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, her silk dress whispering of wealth and taste. Yet Miss Marple noted, her hands toyed restlessly with a pearl bracelet, betraying a tension beneath the polished surface. Inspector Dubois, no relation to Claire, as he had been quick to clarify, stood by the door, his notebook open, his eyes narrowed. "Madame Dubois," he began, his voice clipped. "You were seen arguing with Marcel Fournier in the vineyard the day before his death. Witnesses say you raised your voice, spoke of ruin. Care to explain?" Claire's laugh was light, like the chime of crystal, but it held an edge. "Oh, Inspector, you make it sound so dramatic. Marcel and I had a business disagreement, nothing more. He refused my offer to buy Chateau Lavigne's next vintage outright. A foolish decision, if I may say. I was frustrated, perhaps, but ruin, that was mere rhetoric." She waved a hand, as if dismissing a trivial matter, but her eyes flicked to Miss Marple, assessing. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the delicate porcelain cup warm in her hands. "Business disagreements," she said softly, "can cut deeper than personal ones, Madame Dubois. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a draper who lost his temper over a missed delivery, and it led to quite a scene. Broken windows, if I recall. Frustration, you see, has a way of spilling over." Her tone was gentle, almost apologetic, but her gaze was steady, pinning Claire like a butterfly to a board. Claire's smile tightened, and she adjusted her bracelet, the pearls clicking faintly. "I assure you, mademoiselle, my frustration stayed within the bounds of words. Marcel was stubborn, yes, but I had no reason to harm him. My business thrives. Why would I risk it all over one vineyard? Her voice was smooth, but Miss Marple noted the slight strain, the way her fingers lingered on the bracelet as if anchoring herself. Inspector Dubois flipped a page in his notebook. Your business, madame, is not as thriving as you claim. My men made inquiries in Paris. Your firm lost 2 major contracts last month, and there's talk of debts. Buying Chateau Lavigne's vintage would have secured your reputation, wouldn't it? Marcel's refusal must have been a blow. Claire's eyes flashed, but her composure held. Gossip, Inspector. My firm is quite sound. Yes, I wanted Marcel's wine. It's the best in Bordeaux. But I didn't need it. There are other vineyards, other opportunities. She turned to Miss Marple, her tone softening. You understand, mademoiselle, how men exaggerate these things. A woman in business must be twice as clever, and I am. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of mild agreement. Oh, indeed, madam. Women must often be cleverer, and braver, too. I recall a lady in my village, Mrs. Carter her name was, who ran a tea shop with such skill, yet when a rival opened nearby, she was fierce in protecting her trade. Not with violence, of course, but with determination. She paused, her eyes twinkling. You strike me as a determined woman, Madame Dubois. Claire's smile faltered, just for a moment, and Miss Marple noted it, as she noted the faint crease in Claire's dress, a sign of hurried dressing, perhaps after a sleepless night. Determination is no crime, Claire said, her voice cool. I left the vineyard after our argument, returned to my hotel in Saint-Véran, and spent the evening reviewing accounts. My driver can confirm it. Inspector Dubois raised an eyebrow. Your driver says you returned at 11, madame. That leaves an hour unaccounted for, between your argument with Marcel at 9 and your return. The cellar is a short walk from the vineyard. Plenty of time to pay a visit. Claire's hand stilled on her bracelet, and her eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting I crept into the cellar and struck Marcel with, what, a mallet? Absurd. I'm a businesswoman, not a brute. She turned to Miss Marple, as if seeking an ally. Surely, mademoiselle, you see how ridiculous this is? Miss Marple set her cup down, the soft clink punctuating the silence. Ridiculous things happen, madam, she said. In St. Mary Mead, a quiet spinster once found a stolen necklace in a flower pot. Of all places, people do what they must, when pushed. Tell me, did you visit the cellar that night? Perhaps to continue your discussion with Marcel? Claire's lips parted, then closed, and for a moment she seemed to weigh her words. I did not, she said finally. I went straight to my car after the vineyard. I was angry, yes, but I left. If you must know, I stopped by the village fountain to compose myself. It's a public place. Someone must have seen me. Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. The fountain, she said, almost to herself. A curious place to linger at night. In my village, the churchyard was where people went to think, though sometimes they met others there, by chance or design. She leaned forward slightly. Did you meet anyone, madame, or see anything unusual? Claire hesitated, her fingers brushing her bracelet again. No one, she said too quickly. It was quiet, just the sound of the water. But her voice held a note of strain, and Miss Marple's keen ears caught it as she caught the faint scent of lavender perfume, sharp against the conservatory's earthy air. Inspector Dubois made a note, his pencil scratching. We'll check with the villagers, he said. Someone may recall seeing you. But there's another matter, madame. A letter was found in Marcel's study, addressed to his lawyer. He wrote that you'd threatened to destroy his name if he didn't sell. Strong words for a business disagreement. Claire's face paled, but she recovered swiftly, her laugh brittle. Marcel was prone to exaggeration. I may have said something in the heat of the moment, about outbidding him, perhaps, or swaying his clients. But destroy? Nonsense. I deal in wine, not violence. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression as serene as a vicar's wife at a garden party. Words have power, madame, she said. In St. Mary Mead, a single harsh word once set a whole family against each other. Threats, even idle ones, leave marks. She paused, her eyes lingering on Claire's bracelet, which bore a small charm. A grape cluster, oddly out of place with the pearls. That's a lovely bracelet, she added, almost absently. A gift, perhaps, or a keepsake from a vineyard. Claire's hand froze, and she tucked the bracelet under her sleeve. A trinket, she said, her voice tight. I've had it for years. But Miss Marple noted the gesture, the way Claire's fingers lingered protectively over the charm, as if it held a secret. The conservatory door opened, and Madame Lefebvre entered with a fresh pot of tea, her face still drawn from the previous night's horror. Miss Marple seized the moment to shift the conversation. Madame Lefebvre, she said kindly, you must know the comings and goings of the chateau better than anyone. Did you ever see Madame Dubois in the cellar, perhaps fetching a bottle for a tasting? The housekeeper's hands trembled as she set the pot down, and she glanced at Claire before answering. Not often, mademoiselle, she said. Madame Dubois came for tastings in the salon, but the cellar, that was Marcel's domain, and Pierre's. Though I did see her near the cellar door once, a week ago, speaking with Marcel. They seemed intense. Claire's eyes flashed. A business discussion, she said sharply. Nothing more. But Madame Lefebvre's words hung in the air, and Miss Marple filed them away, along with the housekeeper's nervous glance at Claire. As Claire was dismissed to await further questioning, Miss Marple rose, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. A fascinating woman, she said to Inspector Dubois, her voice low. So polished, yet there's a crack in the veneer, don't you think? Like a teacup that looks perfect until you tap it. She glanced at the conservatory's glass panes, where the vineyard shimmered in the morning light. That bracelet, Inspector. Did you notice the charm? A grape cluster, not unlike the ones carved on the cellar door. Curious for a trinket. Dubois nodded, jotting a note. You think it means something? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Everything means something, Inspector. In St. Mary Mead, a single hairpin once told me more than a dozen witnesses. Madame Dubois is clever, but clever people often overreach. I should like to see the village fountain and perhaps speak to her driver. An hour unaccounted for is an hour too many. As they stepped into the chateau's hall, the air cool with the scent of polished wood, Miss Marple's mind turned over Claire's words, her gestures, the charm on her bracelet. A woman like Claire, she thought, would not strike a blow herself, but desperation could make even the most refined hands grasp at dark solutions. The vineyard, with its endless rows, seemed to whisper of secrets buried deep, and Miss Marple resolved to unearth them, one careful step at a time. Chapter 4. The Rival's Resentment. Miss Jane Marple sat in the cozy, low-ceilinged parlor of the village inn, Le Coq d'Or, where the scent of fresh bread mingled with the faint tang of spilled ale. The inn, nestled in the heart of Saint-Véran, was a hub of local life, its walls adorned with faded prints of vintners at work, and its tables polished by generations of gossip. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over Miss Marple's small figure as she sipped a glass of elderflower cordial, her knitting bag resting beside her chair. Across from her sat Monsieur Roland Beaumont, owner of the neighboring Chateau Beaumont, a man whose broad shoulders and ruddy complexion seemed better suited to a blacksmith than a winemaker. His hands, large and calloused, gripped a tankard of wine with a force that belied his attempt at nonchalance. Inspector Dubois stood near the window, his silhouette framed against the late morning light that filtered through the vineyard beyond. His notebook, ever present, lay open on a side table, its pages filled with the meticulous scrawl of a man determined to untangle a murder. "Monsieur Beaumont," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "you and Marcel Fournier were not on friendly terms. The villagers say you accused him of stealing your clients with underhanded tactics. Care to tell us about that?" Roland's laugh was a deep, rumbling sound, like thunder over the hills, but it lacked warmth. "Marcel? A cheat? Of course he was," he said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes glinting with defiance. "He'd undercut my prices, spread whispers about my wines being inferior, but I didn't need to kill him to beat him. My vineyard's been in my family for 3 generations. Beaumont Claret stands on its own." He took a swig of wine, his movements deliberate, as if to prove his ease. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her mild expression, studied Roland's face, noting the faint lines of strain around his mouth, the way his fingers tightened on the tankard. "Competition," she said softly, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze, "can be a bitter draught, Monsieur Beaumont. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a farmer, Mr. Hodges his name was, who quarreled with his neighbor over a strip of land. He swore he'd never harm a soul, but one night his rival's hayrick went up in flames. Envy, you see, has a way of kindling trouble." Roland's jaw tightened, and he set his tankard down with a thud. "Envy? I didn't envy Marcel. I pitied him, always chasing perfection, alienating everyone. His wines were good, I'll grant, but mine are better. The market would have shown that in time." His voice was gruff, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of unease in his eyes, as if her words had struck closer than he cared to admit. Inspector Dubois stepped forward, his mustache twitching. "Your market, monsieur, is not what it was. My men found your ledgers, debts piling up, clients slipping away to Chateau Lavigne. Marcel's success was drowning you, wasn't it? And you were seen near his chateau at midnight, the very hour he died. What were you doing there?" Roland's face reddened, and he leaned forward, his hands splayed on the table. "Midnight? I was in my own vineyard checking the vines. The moon was bright, perfect for spotting pests. Ask my workers, they'll tell you." But his voice held a defensive edge, and Miss Marple noted the way. His fingers drummed briefly on the table, a rhythm of unease. She set her cordial down, her movements as precise as if she were arranging a tea tray. "The vines," she said, "are a demanding mistress, are they not? In my village, gardeners often worked late, but rarely alone. I wonder, Monsieur Beaumont, did you see anyone else that night? Perhaps near the boundary between your land and Marcel's? It's a short walk to his cellar, I believe." Roland's eyes narrowed, and for a moment he seemed to weigh his words. "I saw no one," he said finally. "My vineyard keeps me busy enough without spying on Marcel's." but his tone was too brusque, and Miss Marple's keen ears caught the slight hesitation, as if he were choosing what to reveal. The inn's door creaked open, admitting a gust of warm air, and the innkeeper, Monsieur Giraud, a wiry man with a face like a weathered grape. He carried a tray of bread and cheese, his eyes darting between Roland and the inspector. "Pardon, mademoiselle, inspector," he said, setting the tray down. "I couldn't help overhearing. Roland's right about the vines. He's always out late, fussing over them. But—" He hesitated, glancing at Roland, then away. "I heard him at the bar last week, talking of a new venture to save his vineyard. Sounded desperate, if you ask me." Roland's hand slammed on the table, rattling the tray. "Desperate? I was talking business, Giraud, not plotting murder. My new venture is a contract with a London buyer, nothing more." He turned to Miss Marple, his voice softening, though it held a forced calm. "You're a lady of sense, mademoiselle. You know how tongues wag in a village like this. I had no reason to kill Marcel. His death doesn't help me. It only stirs up trouble." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression as placid as a Sunday morning. "Trouble," she said, "has a way of finding those who invite it. In St. Mary Mead, a shopkeeper once boasted of a grand new plan, but it was a cover for something darker, smuggling, as it turned out. Boasts, Monsieur Beaumont, can hide as much as they reveal." She paused, her eyes lingering on Roland's hands, which bore faint scratches, as if from brambles or rough wood. "Those marks," she added, almost absently. "From the vines, perhaps?" Roland glanced at his hands, then tucked them under the table. "Thorns," he said curtly. "The vineyard's full of them." But his quick movement betrayed him, and Miss Marple filed the observation away, alongside the innkeeper's words and Roland's claim of a late-night vigil. Inspector Dubois flipped a page in his notebook. "There's more, Monsieur Beaumont. A worker at Chateau Lavigne saw you near their boundary fence 2 nights ago, carrying a lantern. You weren't checking your vines then, were you? And we found a cloth in the cellar, buried near the side door, with your initials, R.B. Care to explain that?" Roland's face darkened, and he rose to his feet, towering over the table. "A cloth? Anyone could have put my initials on it. This is a set-up, Inspector. Marcel had enemies. Pierre, Claire, even that worker Etienne. Why pin it on me?" His voice boomed, but Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his brow, the way his eyes darted to the door as if seeking escape. She leaned forward, her voice soft but piercing. "Enemies, indeed, Monsieur Beaumont, but enemies are made, not born. You and Marcel had a history, did you not? A dispute over a client, perhaps, or a prize at the Bordeaux Fair. In my village, such rivalries festered quietly, until one day they erupted. What was it that pushed you and Marcel so far apart?" Roland sank back into his chair, his defiance waning. "It was years ago," he muttered. "Marcel outbid me for a contract with a Parisian merchant, spread lies about my wine being tainted. I lost half my buyers that season." He paused, his voice dropping. "But I rebuilt. I didn't need to kill him to prove my worth." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the edge of her knitting bag. "Rebuilding is noble," she said, "but old wounds leave scars. In St. Mary Mead, a man once held a grudge over a lost cow, and years later, it led to a fist fight in the pub. Grudges, Monsieur Beaumont, have long shadows." She paused, her eyes twinkling with quiet insight. "That cloth with your initials, do you often leave such things lying about?" Roland's hands clenched, and he shook his head. "Never. Someone's framing me, mademoiselle. I swear it." But his voice lacked conviction, and Miss Marple's mind turned to the cloth, the scratches, the lantern seen near the fence. Too many threads, she thought, and all pointing to Roland, yet something felt too neat, like a puzzle with pieces forced to fit. The innkeeper lingered, clearing the tray with slow, deliberate movements, his ears clearly attuned to the conversation. Miss Marple addressed him gently. "Monsieur Giraud, you hear much in this inn, I'm sure. Did Monsieur Beaumont ever speak of Marcel in anger, perhaps after a glass too many?" Giraud hesitated, his hands pausing on the tray. "He did, mademoiselle," he admitted. "Last month, he said Marcel's success would be his downfall, that he'd pay for his tricks. But Roland's all talk, always has been." He glanced at Roland, then away, as if regretting his words. Roland's face flushed, but he said nothing, his silence louder than any protest. Inspector Dubois made a note, his pencil scratching like a warning. "We'll check your vineyard, Monsieur Beaumont," he said. "Your workers, your tools, everything. If you were near Chateau Lavigne that night, we'll find proof." As Roland was dismissed, his heavy footsteps echoing on the inn's wooden floor, Miss Marple rose, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. "A man of passion," she said to Dubois, her voice low. "Passion can build a vineyard or burn it down. Those scratches, Inspector. Thorns, he says, but the cellar door has rough edges, doesn't it? And that cloth, too convenient, yet it tells a story." She glanced at the inn's window, where the vineyard stretched toward the horizon, its rows hiding secrets in their shadows. "I should like to see your boundary fence, Inspector, and perhaps speak to Monsieur Giraud again. Gossip, you know, is like a vintage. It improves with time, if you know how to taste it." They stepped into the sunlight, the air heavy with the scent of grapes and earth. Miss Marple's mind wove through Roland's words, his anger, the marks on his hands. He was a man pushed to the edge, she thought. But had he leapt? The truth, like a fine wine, needed time to breathe, and she would give it that time, one careful sip at a time. Chapter 5. The Worker's Wrath. Miss Jane Marple sat on a worn wooden bench in the workers' quarters of Chateau Lavigne, a low, stone-walled building tucked behind the main house. The room was sparse, its air heavy with the scent of earth and sweat, the walls lined with pegs holding rough jackets and tools. A single window let in the late afternoon light, casting long shadows across the flagstone floor. Her knitting bag rested beside her, the faint clink of needles within it, a quiet counterpoint to the distant hum of the vineyard. Before her stood Etienne Dubois, a vineyard worker and distant cousin of Inspector Dubois, his broad frame filling the small space. His hands, calloused from years of tending vines, hung at his sides, and his dark eyes held a guarded stillness, like a pond hiding its depths. Inspector Dubois leaned against the doorframe, his notebook open, his mustache twitching with impatience. "Etienne," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You were in the cellar the night Marcel died, fetching tools around 11. The coroner places his death near midnight. You were close, cousin. Very close. What were you doing there so late?" Etienne's face remained impassive, though his fingers twitched slightly, as if longing to grasp a tool or a vine. "Work, Inspector," he said, his voice low and steady. "Marcel asked me to repair a barrel. One of the staves was loose, leaking wine. I went to the cellar to get a mallet and wedges, that's all." His words were simple, but Miss Marple noted the careful way he spoke, each syllable measured, as if he feared saying too much. She tilted her head, her white curls catching the light, her expression as gentle as a grandmother offering tea. "Work at such an hour is admirable, Monsieur Dubois," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I knew a blacksmith, John his name was, who worked late into the night mending plows. But sometimes, you see, he was settling scores, not just hammering iron. Late hours can hide many things." Her tone was kind, but her eyes were sharp, watching Etienne's face for the smallest flicker. Etienne's jaw tightened, and he shifted his weight, his boots scuffing the stone floor. "I had no scores to settle with Marcel," he said. "He was a hard man, yes, demanding, always watching. But he paid fair, and I needed the work. My family depends on me." His voice held a quiet pride, but Miss Marple caught the shadow that crossed his eyes, a hint of something unspoken. Inspector Dubois flipped a page in his notebook. "Hard, you say? Hard enough to dock your wages last month for a broken tool, wasn't it? And you've a history, Etienne. Brawls at the village tavern, a temper that flares when you've had a drink. A mallet's missing from the cellar toolbox, and you were there. It doesn't look good." Etienne's hands clenched, the knuckles whitening, but his voice remained steady. "I didn't take the mallet. I used it, yes, to tap the wedges, but I left it on the workbench. As for the tavern, those fights were years ago. Foolish things, overcards, or a spilled drink. I'm not that man anymore." He met the inspector's gaze, then looked to Miss Marple, as if seeking understanding. "You believe me, don't you, mademoiselle? I'm no killer." Miss Marple's fingers brushed the edge of her knitting bag, her movements deliberate. "Belief is a delicate thing, Monsieur Dubois," she said. "In my village, there was a lad, young Tommy, who swore he'd never steal, yet apples kept vanishing from the orchard. It wasn't theft that undid him, but the lies he told to cover it. Tell me, did you see Marcel in the cellar that night? Or anyone else, perhaps?" Etienne hesitated, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I saw Marcel," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was checking the vats, muttering about the fermentation. He didn't speak to me, just waved me off. I finished my work and left. I didn't see anyone else." But his pause before answering was a fraction too long, and Miss Marple's keen senses noted it, as she noted the faint smudge of dirt on his sleeve, not unlike the mud found in the cellar. Inspector Dubois stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You didn't mention seeing Marcel before, Etienne. That's a detail you kept quiet. And the mallet, convenient that it's gone, isn't it? The murder weapon, perhaps, and you the last to touch it." Etienne's head snapped up, a spark of anger in his eyes. "I'm no liar, cousin. I didn't think to mention Marcel. It was a normal night, him fussing over the wine. As for the mallet, someone else must have taken it. I left it where it belonged." His voice rose, then fell, as if he'd caught himself. He turned to Miss Marple, his tone softer. "I'm a worker, mademoiselle, not a schemer. I fix barrels, tend vines. Killing Marcel would gain me nothing." Miss Marple nodded, her expression as serene as a Sunday afternoon. "Nothing is a curious word," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, a gardener once claimed he wanted nothing, yet he sabotaged a rival's roses to win a prize. Small grievances, Monsieur Dubois, can grow like weeds. Marcel docked your wages, did he not? That must have stung, with a family to feed." Etienne's face darkened, and he rubbed his hands together, as if trying to erase the calluses that marked his labor. "It stung, yes," he said. "My wife's sick, and the doctor's bills are high. Marcel said the tool was costly, that I was careless, but I swallowed it. I needed this job." His voice held a raw edge, and Miss Marple saw the truth in it, but also the anger, banked like a fire that could flare at any moment. The door to the quarters opened, and a young worker, barely out of his teens, poked his head in. "Pardon, Inspector," he said, his voice nervous. "Madame Lefebvre sent me. She says the tool shed's been checked, and the mallet's not there either. Thought you should know." He glanced at Etienne, then ducked out, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. "A missing mallet," she murmured. "And you, Monsieur Dubois, the last to use it. Curious, isn't it? In my village, a lost hammer once led to a theft, though the thief swore he'd only misplaced it. Did you notice anything unusual in the cellar that night? A sound, perhaps, or a shadow?" Etienne's brow furrowed, and he seemed to search his memory. "There was a noise," he said slowly, "like a barrel shifting near the back of the cellar. I thought it was just the wood settling, but I didn't check. I was in a hurry to finish and get home." His voice was earnest, but Miss Marple noted the way. His eyes darted to the window, as if the vineyard beyond might hold answers he couldn't voice. Inspector Dubois made a note, his pencil scratching sharply. "A noise you didn't investigate? Convenient, Etienne. And that mud in the cellar, it matches the soil near the vineyard's edge, where you were seen digging last week. Care to explain that?" Etienne's face paled, and his hands stilled. "Digging?" he said, his voice tight. "I was fixing a fence post near the boundary. The soil's wet there, from the irrigation. If there's mud in the cellar, it could have come from anyone's boots." But his words lacked force, and Miss Marple saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he stood as if braced for a blow. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but probing. "Fences and posts," she said, "are practical things, but they can mark boundaries. In more ways than one. In St. Mary Mead, a man once dug a trench to keep his neighbor's pigs out, but it was really a feud over an old slight. Did you have any such disagreements with Marcel beyond the wages?" Etienne shook his head, his eyes fixed on the floor. "No, mademoiselle. Marcel was the master here. I did my work, kept my head down. That's all." But his voice was too flat, and Miss Marple's mind turned to the noise. He'd heard the mud on his sleeve, the missing mallet. Small details, she thought, but in St. Mary Mead, small details had unraveled greater crimes. Inspector Dubois closed his notebook with a snap. "We'll search your quarters, Etienne, and the vineyard's edge. If that mallet turns up or anything else, you'll have more to answer for." He turned to Miss Marple, his expression grim. "What do you think, mademoiselle? He's holding back, isn't he?" Miss Marple rose, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. "People often hold back, Inspector," she said, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. "In my village, it was the quiet ones who surprised you most. Etienne is loyal, perhaps, but loyalty can turn to resentment when pressed. That noise in the cellar. Someone was there, I think, and Etienne knows more than he says." She glanced at the window, where the vineyard stretched under the fading light, its vines like sentinels guarding their secrets. "I should like to see the vineyard's edge, Inspector, where Etienne was digging, and perhaps speak to that young worker again. The truth, you know, is like a vine. It needs coaxing to bear fruit." As they stepped into the cooling air, the workers' quarters behind them, Miss Marple's thoughts wove through Etienne's words, his guarded eyes, the smudge on his sleeve. A man with a family, a temper, and a grievance. She had seen such men before, in St. Mary Mead, where anger could simmer until it boiled over. But was Etienne the killer, or merely another thread in the tangled web of Chateau Lavigne? She would find out, she thought, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 6. The Cellar's Clues. Miss Jane Marple descended the stone steps into the cellar of Chateau Lavigne, her black lace-up shoes tapping softly in the cool, damp air. The lantern in her hand cast flickering shadows across the vaulted ceiling, illuminating rows of oak barrels that stood like silent sentinels. The scent of fermenting grapes mingled with the faint, acrid tang of spilled wine, a reminder of the violence that had shattered the cellar's peace. Inspector Dubois followed close behind, his heavy boots echoing, his lantern adding a steady glow to hers. His notebook, tucked under his arm, seemed almost an extension of his stern demeanor, as if it held the answers he sought. Miss Marple's knitting bag hung from her elbow, its contents undisturbed, though her fingers itched to unravel the mystery before her as deftly as she might a skein of wool. The cellar was, much as it had been the night of Marcel Fournier's death, save for the absence of his body, now removed to the morgue. The shattered barrel remained, its splintered staves jutting inward, the dark stain of wine and blood still visible on the stone floor. Miss Marple paused beside it, her sharp eyes tracing the jagged edges. "A forceful blow," she murmured, her voice soft as a whisper in church. "Not just to the barrel, Inspector, but to poor Monsieur Fournier. Whoever struck him meant to kill, I think. Passion, perhaps, or calculation." Dubois nodded, his mustache twitching. "The coroner confirms it. A single strike to the head, likely with the missing mallet. But the barrel puzzles me, mademoiselle. Why smash it? The wine's worth a fortune." He gestured to the surrounding barrels, their polished surfaces gleaming in the lantern light. Marcel was meticulous. A broken barrel would have driven him to distraction. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, the kind that might greet a neighbor's tale of mischief in St. Mary Mead. "Distraction," she said, "can be a motive in itself. In my village, a boy once broke a window to draw attention from a stolen pie. Perhaps this barrel was broken to hide something, or to suggest something." She knelt, her movements surprisingly spry for her age, and examined the floor. A faint smear of mud caught her eye, distinct against the clean stone. "This mud, Inspector," she said, pointing with a gloved finger. "It's not from the cellar, is it? You said it was swept daily." Dubois crouched beside her, his lantern casting a pool of light. "No, mademoiselle. Marcel insisted on cleanliness. Dust could taint the wine. This mud came from outside." He straightened, his eyes narrowing. "We found similar soil near the vineyard's edge, where Etienne was digging, but it could have come from anyone's boots, Pierre, Claire, Roland." Miss Marple rose, her gaze drifting to a side door, half hidden behind a row of barrels. Its iron hinges were rusted, and a faint scuff of dirt marked the threshold. "This door," she said, "leads to the vineyard, I presume?" A convenient exit for someone in a hurry. She stepped closer, her lantern revealing a faint scratch on the door's edge, as if something heavy had scraped against it. "Or perhaps an entrance," she added, almost to herself. Dubois pushed the door open, revealing a narrow path that wound through the vineyard's rows. The evening air was warm, heavy with the scent of earth and grapes. "This path leads to the boundary fence," he said. "Roland's vineyard is just beyond, and the workers' quarters aren't far. Anyone could have slipped in or out." He paused, then added, "One of my men found something yesterday, buried near this path. I was going to show you later, but since we're here—" He led her a short distance along the path, where the soil was freshly turned, as if someone had dug in, haste. Kneeling, he brushed away loose earth to reveal a bundle wrapped in a coarse cloth. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a heavy mallet, its handle worn but sturdy, and a scrap of fabric stained with what looked like dried blood. The cloth bore the initials R.B. in faded embroidery. "Roland Beaumont," Dubois said, his voice triumphant. "This is the murder weapon, I'd wager. Buried to hide it, but not well enough." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she examined the find, her expression as calm as if she were inspecting a neighbor's embroidery. "Very convenient," she said softly. "Initials on a cloth, buried so near the path. In St. Mary Mead, I once found a monogrammed handkerchief in a flower bed, meant to point to a thief. It was too obvious, you see, and led us to the real culprit, a man who thought himself cleverer than he was." She tilted her head, studying the mallet. "This handle, smooth, but with a nick here, near the base, as if it caught on something rough, like that door." Dubois frowned, turning the mallet in his hands. "You think it's planted? But who would frame Roland? Pierre, perhaps, or Etienne? Claire's too refined for such a crude trick." Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost wistful. "Refinement, Inspector, is a mask some wear well. But let us not rush to conclusions. This cloth, this mallet, they tell a story, but not the whole one. In my village, clues left in plain sight often hid deeper truths." She stepped back toward the cellar, her lantern casting long shadows. "I should like to see where this mud leads. The path, perhaps, or beyond." They returned to the cellar, and Miss Marple paced its length, her eyes scanning the floor, the barrels, the walls. Near a corner, half hidden by a stack of crates, she spotted another smudge of mud, this one fainter, as if someone had tried to wipe it away. "Someone was careful," she said, "but not careful enough. In St. Mary Mead, a maid once tried to scrub a stain from a rug, but it only drew my eye to it. Carelessness betrays, you know?" Dubois followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. "You think the killer came back to cover their tracks?" He knelt, examining the smudge. "This mud's fresher than the rest. Could be from after the murder, someone checking their work." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the edge of her shawl. "Or hiding something else. That barrel. Why smash it? The wine's loss would hurt the chateau, but who benefits? Roland, perhaps, with his struggling vineyard. Or Pierre, eager for control. Even Claire, if she thought a scandal might force a sale." She paused, her eyes lingering on the side door. "And Etienne, with his tools and his temper, mud on his sleeve, a noise he heard but didn't investigate. Everyone has a piece of this puzzle, Inspector." The cellar's silence was broken by a faint creak from above, and Madame Lefebvre appeared at the top of the steps, her face pale in the lantern light. "Pardon, mademoiselle. Inspector," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought you should know. The workers are talking. They say Etienne was seen near the path last night, after he claimed he went home. And there's a rumor Pierre kept a second notebook, not the one he showed you." Dubois's eyes sharpened, and he made a note. "A second notebook? That boy's hiding more than he says, and Etienne, lying about his whereabouts, doesn't help his case. He turned to Miss Marple. "What do you make of it, mademoiselle?" Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the shattered barrel, then back to the side door. "People hide what they fear to reveal," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, a grocer kept 2 ledgers, one for the tacksman, one for himself. Pierre's notebook, Etienne's late-night wanderings, Claire's hour by the fountain, Roland's scratches. They're all threads, Inspector. We must follow them carefully, lest they tangle." She stepped toward the door, her lantern steady. "I should like to walk this path, Inspector, and see where it leads. The vineyard, I think, has more to tell us." As they emerged into the twilight, the vines stretched before them, their leaves whispering in the breeze. Miss Marple's mind turned over the clues, the mud, the mallet, the cloth with its damning initials. Too neat, she thought, yet too messy to be ignored. The truth, like the vineyard's harvest, was ripening, and she would pluck it, one careful step at a time. Chapter 7. The Village Gossip. Miss Jane Marple stood in the bustling market square of Saint-Véran, her small figure wrapped in a neatly pressed shawl, her black hat perched atop her white curls. The morning sun bathed the cobbled plaza in a warm, golden light, glinting off the stalls laden with fresh figs, crusty baguettes, and jars of amber honey. Villagers moved about, their voices a lively hum. Farmers haggling over prices, children darting between carts, and women exchanging whispers over baskets of grapes. The air carried the earthy scent of the nearby vineyard, mingled with the sharp tang of cheese and the sweetness of ripe fruit. Miss Marple's knitting bag hung from her arm, its faint clink of needles a quiet underscore to the square's clamor. She leaned lightly on a wooden bench near the central fountain, its water sparkling as it splashed into a stone basin, and observed the scene with eyes that missed nothing. Inspector Dubois stood beside her, his navy uniform slightly rumpled from a morning of inquiries, his notebook open in his hand. His mustache twitched with impatience, though his tone was respectful. "The villagers talk freely, mademoiselle," he said, scanning the crowd. "Too freely, perhaps. Every stall has a story about Marcel's death, but separating truth from rumor is like sifting flour from chaff. Have you learned anything useful?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile, the kind that might greet a neighbor's tale over tea in St. Mary Mead. "Gossip, Inspector," she said softly, "is a village's lifeblood. In my experience, it's never entirely false, only twisted, like a vine grown wild. One must simply know where to prune." Her eyes flickered to a nearby stall, where a grocer, Monsieur Lefebvre, was arranging apples with a practiced hand. His wife, Madame Lefebvre, the chateau's housekeeper, had spoken of Pierre's agitation and Etienne's late-night wanderings, but Miss Marple suspected the village held more secrets, waiting to be coaxed out. She approached the grocer's stall, her steps measured, her manner as unassuming as a Sunday churchgoer. "Good morning, Monsieur Lefebvre," she said, her voice warm. "Your apples look splendid. I wonder, do you ever supply Chateau Lavigne? Monsieur Fournier must have been particular about his table." The grocer, a wiry man with a face creased like old leather, looked up, his hands pausing on a crate. "Oh, aye, mademoiselle," he said, his tone cautious but friendly. "Marcel bought from me regular, apples, pears, sometimes cheese. Always paid prompt, though he'd haggle like a devil." He chuckled, then sobered, glancing around. "Terrible. What happened to him? The village hasn't stopped talking since." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright with interest. "A tragedy indeed," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, when our baker passed, poor man, it was his heart. The village buzzed for weeks. Everyone had a theory. Have you heard any such theories here about Monsieur Fournier's death?" Lefebvre leaned closer, lowering his voice, his eyes darting to ensure no one overheard. "Plenty, mademoiselle. Some say it was Pierre, the assistant. Too ambitious, that one, always sniffing for Marcel's job. Others point to Roland Beaumont, what with his vineyard failing. I heard him myself, last week at the inn, boasting he'd found a way to turn things around. Sounded like he meant to outdo Marcel, one way or another." He shook his head, wiping his hands on his apron. "Mind you, it's just talk. Folks love a scandal." Miss Marple's smile was encouraging, her head tilted as if weighing a recipe. "Just talk, perhaps," she said, "but talk often carries a seed of truth. In my village, a grocer's wife once mentioned a stranger seen near a robbed shop, and it led us to the thief. Did anyone else linger near the chateau that night? Do you know?" Lefebvre hesitated, then nodded toward a seamstress's stall across the square, where a middle-aged woman was threading a needle with deft fingers. "You might ask Madame Renaud," he said. "She's got a sharp eye. Saw Madame Claire's car parked near the chateau late that night. Past 10, she said. Odd for a lady like her to be about so late." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind filing away the grocer's words as she moved toward the seamstress's stall. Inspector Dubois followed, his notebook at the ready. "Madame Claire again," he muttered. "Her story about the fountain doesn't hold up if she was at the chateau. And Roland's boasts, more evidence he had motive." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she approached Madame Renaud, whose stall was a riot of colored fabrics and ribbons. "Good morning, madame," she said, admiring a bolt of blue silk. "Such fine work. You must see much of Saint Véran's comings and goings from this spot. I understand you noticed Madame Dubois's car near Chateau Lavigne the night of the murder. That must have been unusual." Madame Renaud, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a quick smile, set her needle down. "Oh, yes, mademoiselle," she said, her voice eager. "I was closing up, near 10, when I saw her car, a fancy black one, Parisian plates, parked by the chateau's gate. She wasn't in it, mind you, and I didn't see her, but it stayed there a good while. I thought it queer, her being a city lady and all." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some say she wanted Marcel's vineyard for herself, and he wouldn't sell. That'd make anyone cross." Miss Marple nodded, her expression as mild as if discussing a church fete. "Cross, indeed," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, a lady once argued with a neighbor over a borrowed teapot, and it led to such a fuss. Did you see anyone else that night, madame, near the chateau or the vineyard?" Madame Renaud's eyes lit up, relishing the chance to share. "Well, now you mention it, I saw Pierre Lemoine earlier, skulking out of the cellar with a lantern, looking like he'd seen a ghost. And there's more. Old Madame Picard, who lives by the vineyard's edge, swears she saw Etienne digging near the boundary fence, past 11. Digging, at that hour, makes you wonder what he was burying." Inspector Dubois scribbled furiously, his brow furrowed. "Digging again," he said. "Etienne didn't mention that, and Pierre with a lantern. His story about checking vats is wearing thin." He turned to Miss Marple. "This is a tangle, mademoiselle. Everyone was near the chateau that night." Miss Marple's fingers brushed her knitting bag, her mind weaving the threads of gossip. "A tangle, yes," she said, "but every knot can be undone with care. In St. Mary Mead, gossip once led me to a stolen locket, hidden in a hedge. We must follow these threads. Madame Claire's car, Pierre's lantern, Etienne's digging, Roland's boasts." She paused, her eyes drifting to the fountain, where a group of children played, their laughter bright against the square's hum. "I should like to speak to Madame Picard," she added. "An old woman by a vineyard sees more than most." They crossed the square to a small cottage at its edge, where Madame Picard, a stooped figure with eyes like polished pebbles, sat on a stool, shelling peas. Her hands moved with the rhythm of years, but her gaze was sharp as she greeted Miss Marple. "You're the English lady, asking about Marcel," she said, her voice crackling like dry leaves. "I knew he'd come to a bad end. Too proud, that man, always lording his wine over the village." Miss Marple smiled, settling onto a bench beside her. "Pride can be a heavy burden," she said. "I understand you saw Etienne Dubois near the vineyard that night, digging. That must have been curious, so late." Madame Picard nodded, her fingers pausing on a pod. "Past 11, it was," she said. "I was up, tending my rheumatism, when I saw him by the fence, shovel in hand. Looked furtive, like he didn't want to be seen. I thought he was hiding something. Poaching, maybe, or worse." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "And I saw Roland Beaumont, too, near midnight, walking by the chateau's gate with a lantern. He's a hothead, that one, always cursing Marcel's name." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest, though her face remained serene. "Two men, both near the chateau," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, a late-night wanderer once led us to a burglary. Did you see anything else, Madame? Perhaps near the fountain, where Madame Dubois claims she was?" Madame Picard snorted, snapping a pea-pod. "That fancy lady? No one saw her at the fountain, I'll wager. It's too quiet there at night. Only lovers or schemers linger." She paused, then added, "There was a boy, though, young Jacques, the baker's lad. He was running through the square, said he saw Pierre near the cellar looking wild-eyed, as he put it." Inspector Dubois made a note, his pencil scratching. "Jacques," he said, "we'll find him. This is a web, mademoiselle. Pierre, Claire, Etienne, Roland, all circling the chateau like moths." He turned to Miss Marple, his expression grim. "What do you make of it?" Miss Marple rose, her shawl neat against her shoulders. "A web, indeed," she said, her voice soft as a summer breeze. "In St. Mary Mead, gossip was like a spider's thread, fragile, but leading to the heart of things. Pierre's lantern, Claire's car, Etienne's shovel, Roland's lantern, they're all points on a map. We must trace them, Inspector, to the cellar and beyond." She glanced at the fountain, its water catching the sun. "I should like to see that fountain, and perhaps find young Jacques. The smallest voices, you know, often speak the loudest truths." As they moved through the square, the villagers' chatter followed them, a chorus of whispers weaving around the mystery of Marcel's death. Miss Marple's mind turned over the tales, each suspect seen, each with a reason to resent the winemaker. The truth, she thought, was like the fountain's water, clear yet ever moving, and she would catch it, one careful drop at a time. Chapter 8. The Motive. Unraveled. Miss Jane Marple sat in the grand library of Chateau Lavigne, a room of towering oak shelves heavy with leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of old paper. The late afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, casting golden bars across the Persian rug, where dust motes danced like secrets in the air. Her small figure, clad in a neat tweed skirt and shawl, seemed almost swallowed by the high-backed chair she occupied. Yet her presence commanded the room with a quiet authority. Her knitting bag rested at her feet, untouched, as her sharp eyes surveyed the four suspects gathered before her: Pierre Lemoine, Madame Claire Dubois, Roland Beaumont, and Etienne Dubois. Each stood or sat with varying degrees of unease, their faces lit by the flickering glow of a chandelier, its crystals winking like eyes that knew too much. Inspector Dubois stood by the fireplace, its mantle adorned with a carved grapevine, his notebook tucked away for once, his hands clasped behind his back. His mustache was still, his expression one of expectant gravity. "Mademoiselle Marple," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "You asked to gather them here. You've heard their stories, seen the cellar, walked the vineyard. Have you found the thread that ties this knot?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, serene smile, the kind that might preface a comment on the weather in St. Mary Mead, yet her eyes were as keen as a hawk's. "A knot indeed, Inspector," she said softly, her voice threading through the tense silence. "In my village, I once untangled a mystery over a missing brooch. Such a small thing, but it led to a theft, because people, you see, cannot help but leave traces of their hearts. Here, in Saint-Véran, the traces are clear, if one looks closely." She turned to Pierre, whose sharp features were taut, his hands fidgeting as he stood near a bookshelf. "Monsieur Lemoine," she began, "your ambition burned brightly. Marcel's refusal to promote you stung, didn't it? That argument in the vineyard, your late hours in the cellar, they spoke of a young man hungry for more. Yet your notebook, so meticulously kept, showed no sign of violence, only a boy's dream of mastery. You hid your anger, I think, but not your life. Murder would have cost you the vineyard you love." Pierre's shoulders sagged, relief flickering in his eyes. Though he said nothing, his lips pressed tight. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Madame Claire, who sat poised on a velvet settee, her silk dress immaculate, her pearl bracelet catching the light. "Madame Dubois," Miss Marple continued, "your pride is as polished as your manners. Marcel's refusal to sell his vintage was a blow to your faltering business, and your threats, overheard by the maid, suggested a woman who does not lose gracefully. Yet your car, seen by Madame Renaud, was parked at a distance, and your story of the fountain, though unverified, holds no trace of blood. You schemed, perhaps, but a mallet is not your weapon." Claire's eyes narrowed, but she inclined her head, her bracelet clicking softly as she adjusted it. Miss Marple's attention moved to Etienne, who stood near the door, his calloused hands clasped, his face a mask of quiet defiance. "Monsieur Dubois," she said, "your loyalty to the vineyard is deep, but so is your anger. Marcel's docked wages hurt your family, and your presence in the cellar, the mud on your sleeve, the noise you heard but did not pursue, these point to a man caught in a moment of rage. Yet your shovel, your digging, was for a fence post, not a grave, and your temper, though real, cools quickly. You did not strike the fatal blow." Etienne's eyes met hers, a flicker of gratitude in their depths, though his stance remained rigid. Miss Marple's gaze settled at last on Roland Beaumont, who lounged in a chair by the window, his broad frame filling the space, his ruddy face set in a scowl. "Monsieur Beaumont," she said, her voice steady as a vicar's sermon, You had the most to gain from Marcel's death. Your vineyard, struggling under debts, could not compete with Chateau Lavigne's success. Your boasts at the inn, your lantern seen near the chateau, the scratches on your hands, they paint a picture of envy grown bitter. Roland's scowl deepened, and he leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "You're wrong, mademoiselle. I told you, I was checking my vines. Those scratches are from thorns, not murder. And that cloth with my initials, someone planted it to frame me." His hands gripped the arms of his chair, the scratches on his knuckles stark in the sunlight. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes held no mercy. "Thorns, you say," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, a man once claimed a cut came from a rosebush, but it was from a broken window he'd climbed through to steal. The scratches on your hands, Monsieur Beaumont, match the rough edge of the cellar door, where the mallet's handle nicked the wood. And the mud in the cellar, clay, distinct to your vineyard's northwestern corner, where you walked that night." Roland's face paled, but he shook his head, his voice rising. "Clay? It's everywhere in Bordeaux. You've no proof, only guesses." His eyes darted to the others, seeking support, but found only wary glances. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft but unrelenting. "Proof, monsieur, lies in the details. The cloth with your initials was buried too hastily, as if meant to be found, yet the mallet's nick tells a truer story. You lured Marcel to the cellar, didn't you? A fabricated deal, perhaps, to discuss a truce. But your anger, years of losses of Marcel's taunts, overcame you. You struck him with the mallet, smashed the barrel to suggest a struggle, then buried the weapon to shift blame." Roland's hands trembled, and he rose, towering over the room. "This is nonsense," he roared. "Why would I risk everything? My vineyard—" "Your vineyard," Miss Marple interrupted, her voice cutting through his like a knife through silk, was failing. Marcel's death would tarnish Chateau Lavigne's name, drive away its buyers, and let you claim its clients. Your new venture, boasted at the inn, was no London contract. It was the purchase of Lavigne's land. Once its value fell. The footprints by the buried mallet match your boots, monsieur, heavy and broad, unlike Pierre's or Etienne's. And the lantern Madame Picard saw? It was yours, guiding you to the chateau at midnight." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint tick of a clock on the mantel. Pierre's eyes widened, Claire's hand froze on her bracelet, and Etienne's shoulders relaxed, as if a weight had lifted. Roland's face crumpled, his defiance draining like wine from a cracked barrel. "I didn't mean to kill him," he muttered, sinking back into his chair, his voice barely audible. "I went to talk, to make him see reason. He laughed at me, called my wine swill. I lost control. The mallet was there, and He trailed off, his head in his hands. Inspector Dubois stepped forward, his cuffs gleaming in the chandelier's light. "Roland Beaumont," he said, his voice formal. "You are under arrest for the murder of Marcel Fournier." 2 gendarmes entered, their boots heavy on the rug, and Roland offered no resistance as they led him away, his broad shoulders slumped in defeat. Miss Marple watched him go, her expression one of quiet sorrow. "Envy," she said softly, almost to herself. "In St. Mary Mead, it was a stolen recipe that set 2 women against each other. Here, it was a vineyard, but the heart is the same. People destroy what they cannot have." Claire rose, her composure restored, though her eyes were wary. "You're a remarkable woman, mademoiselle," she said, her voice cool. "I thought you a harmless old lady, but you see too much." Miss Marple's smile was gentle. Old ladies, madame, are often underestimated. In my village, it's the quiet ones who hear the most." She turned to Pierre and Etienne, who stood silently, their faces a mix of relief and shock. "You both have work to do," she said. "The vineyard needs you now, more than ever." As the suspects dispersed, Inspector Dubois approached, his expression one of grudging admiration. "You've done it again, mademoiselle," he said. "The mallet, the mud, the footprints? How did you know?" Miss Marple gathered her knitting bag, her movements precise. "Insane. Mary Mead, Inspector. I learned that people are much the same, whether in a cottage or a chateau. They hide their sins, but the smallest things betray them. A scratch, a boast, a lie. The cellar told its story, and I only listened." She stepped toward the door, the library's shadows lengthening as the sun dipped lower. The vineyard beyond the windows stretched toward the horizon, its vines serene in the fading light. The truth, Miss Marple thought, had been plucked at last, like a ripe grape from the vine, and Chateau Lavigne could begin to heal. Chapter 9. The Confession. The library of Chateau Lavigne was cloaked in the hush of early evening, its tall windows framing a sky streaked with the last embers of sunset. The air held a faint chill, as if the room itself mourned the violence that had shattered its peace. Miss Jane Marple sat in her high-backed chair, her small figure a study in quiet resolve, her white curls catching the flicker of the chandelier above. Her knitting bag lay at her feet, a silent companion, its needles still for now. Before her, Roland Beaumont slumped in his chair, his broad frame diminished, his ruddy face drained of its usual bluster. The gendarmes stood at the door, their presence a stern reminder of the law's weight, while Inspector Dubois paced slowly by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache still as he waited for the final thread of the mystery to unravel. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp and steady, rested on Roland, her expression one of gentle sorrow, like a village spinster lamenting a neighbor's fall. "Monsieur Beaumont," she said softly, her voice threading through the silence like a needle through cloth. "You have carried a heavy burden, I think. Envy is a cruel master, and it led you to a dark place. But the truth, once spoken, can lighten the heart, even now. Will you tell us what happened that night in the cellar?" Roland's hands, scratched and calloused, gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. His eyes, once defiant, now flickered with a mix of shame and exhaustion. "You've already guessed it, haven't you, mademoiselle?" he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "You with your quiet ways and sharp eyes. I didn't mean for it to end like this. I swear it." Inspector Dubois stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on Roland. "Then speak, man," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "You admitted to striking Marcel, but we need the whole story. What drove you to it? And why the cellar, the mallet, the buried cloth?" Roland's shoulders sagged, and he ran a hand through his thinning hair, his fingers trembling. "It started years ago," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marcel and I were friends once, you know. Shared a bottle, laughed over the vines. But he changed. Got greedy, started undercutting me, stealing my buyers with lies about my wine. My vineyard, my family's pride, started to crumble. Debts piled up, and I could hear my father's voice in my head, cursing me for failing." He paused, his eyes distant, as if seeing those long-ago days. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged, though her mind was alert, piecing together the fragments. "Old friendships," she said gently, can turn bitter, like wine left too long in the cask. In St. Mary Mead, two sisters fell out over a shared garden, and it led to years of silence. What pushed you beyond words, Monsieur Beaumont? Roland's gaze dropped to the floor, where the Persian rug's intricate patterns seemed to mock his tangled life. The Bordeaux Fair, he said. Last year, Marcel won the grand prize, and I heard him laughing with the judges, saying my claret was fit for pigs. I lost my best client that day, a London merchant who'd been with me for a decade. I swore I'd make him pay, not with blood, but in the market. I thought I could outlast him. He leaned forward, his voice growing strained. But this season, my vines failed. Blight, bad weather. Marcel's thrived, and he flaunted it, offering to buy my land at half its worth. I was drowning, mademoiselle, and he was holding my head under. His hands clenched, the scratches on his knuckles stark in the chandelier's light. Miss Marple's fingers brushed her shawl, her voice as soft as a summer breeze. Drowning men grasp at anything, she said. In my village, a farmer once sabotaged a rival's crop to save his own. Did you go to the cellar to confront Marcel, perhaps to plead your case? Roland nodded, his eyes glistening. I sent him a note, said I wanted to talk business, a truce. I knew he'd be in the cellar at midnight, checking his precious vats. I went through the side door, carrying my lantern. I only meant to make him see reason, to stop his games. His voice cracked, and he rubbed his face, as if to erase the memory. But he laughed at me again, called me a failure, said I'd never match him. The mallet was there, on the workbench. I grabbed it, just to scare him, I swear. But he kept taunting, and I swung. The room was silent, save for the faint crackle of the fire. Inspector Dubois's face was grim, his hand poised to signal the gendarmes, but he let Roland continue. "And the barrel?" he asked. "Why smash it?" Roland's head sank lower. "To make it look like a robbery or a fight gone wrong. I panicked, mademoiselle. I didn't think. I hit the barrel, let the wine spill, then took the mallet and that cloth, an old rag from my vineyard, with my initials from years ago. I buried them near the path, thinking no one would look there. I was wrong." His voice broke, and he looked at Miss Marple, his eyes pleading. "I didn't plan it. It was a moment, a terrible moment." Miss Marple's expression was one of quiet compassion, though her eyes held no illusion about the crime. "Moments," she said, "can change everything. In St. Mary Mead, a man once struck another in a fit of anger over a card game, and it ended in tragedy. You meant to scare Marcel, perhaps, but the heart's anger is a heavy thing, Monsieur Beaumont. The scratches on your hands, the mud from your vineyard, the nick on the mallet, they told the truth you could not hide." Roland's shoulders shook, and a sob escaped him, a sound raw and broken. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I see his face every time I close my eyes. I just wanted my vineyard to live, to prove him wrong. Now I've lost everything." Inspector Dubois stepped forward, his voice formal. "Roland Beaumont, you've confessed to the murder of Marcel Fournier. You'll come with us now." The gendarmes moved to his side, their cuffs gleaming, and Roland rose without protest, his head bowed as they led him from the library. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, leaving a stillness that seemed to settle over the room like dust. Miss Marple remained seated, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the fire's dying embers. "A sad end," she said softly, almost to herself. "In St. Mary Mead, I saw many such endings. Anger, envy, a moment's madness. People think they can bury their sins, but the earth always gives them up. Inspector Dubois approached, his expression a mix of admiration and weariness. "You saw it all, mademoiselle," he said. "The mud, the scratches, the cloth. You pieced it together like a tapestry. How do you do it?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes distant. "People are the same, Inspector, whether in a village or a vineyard. They wear masks, but their hearts betray them. In St. Mary Mead, I learned to listen, not just to words, but to the silences, the glances, the things left unsaid. The cellar spoke, and I heard it." She rose, gathering her knitting bag, her movements as precise as ever. "The vineyard will heal now, I think. Pierre and Etienne will see to it, but it will carry this scar, as all places do when blood is spilled." She stepped toward the door, pausing to glance at the library's shelves, where the books stood like witnesses to the truth unveiled. "I shall take a walk before dinner, Inspector," she said. "The air will do me good. And perhaps a word with Madame Lefebvre. She sees more than she says, you know." As she left the library, the chateau's halls were quiet, the weight of Roland's confession settling over them like a fog. Outside, the vineyard stretched under the twilight, its vines whispering of secrets laid bare. Miss Marple's mind, ever active, turned to the small details, the housekeeper's nervous glances, the village's lingering whispers. The case was solved, but in St. Mary Mead, she had learned that even closed books held hidden pages, and she would keep her eyes open, just in case. Chapter 10. The Quiet Departure. The morning sun bathed the vineyards of Saint-Véran in a gentle golden glow, casting long shadows across the rows of vines that stretched toward the horizon. Chateau Lavigne stood serene atop its hill, its stone walls warmed by the light, as if the turmoil of Marcel Fournier's murder had already begun to fade into the earth. Miss Jane Marple stood on the chateau's gravel drive, her small, neat figure wrapped in a woolen shawl, her black hat perched atop her white curls. Her knitting bag hung from her arm, its familiar weight a comfort as she prepared to leave this place of beauty and tragedy. A hired car waited nearby, its engine idling softly, ready to take her to the train station for the journey back to St. Mary Mead. Inspector Dubois stood beside her, his navy uniform crisp despite the early hour, his mustache twitching with a mix of gratitude and reluctance. "Mademoiselle Marple," he said, his voice warm but tinged with regret. "You've done us a great service. Roland Beaumont's confession has settled the village, though the scandal will linger like a stain on good linen. How do you see so much, when others see only shadows?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, almost wistful smile, the kind that might accompany a reminiscence over tea. "Shadows, Inspector," she said softly, "are where the truth hides. In St. Mary Mead, I learned that people are much the same, whether in a cottage or a chateau. They love, they envy, they err, and they leave traces. In a glance, a word, a smudge of mud. I only watch and listen, as an old spinster does." Her eyes twinkled, though her expression held a quiet sorrow for the lives touched by Marcel's death. Dubois nodded, his hand resting briefly on his notebook, now tucked in his pocket. "The mud, the mallet, the scratches. You saw what my men missed. Pierre is back at work, vowing to honor Marcel's legacy. Etienne, too, though he's quieter now. Even Madame Claire has left for Paris, her pride dented but intact. You've given them a chance to move forward." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the vineyard, where workers moved among the vines, their figures small against the vast green sea. "A vineyard," she said, is like a village. It thrives on care, but it bears its scars. In St. Mary Mead, after a theft or a quarrel, life went on, but the memory lingered. Chateau Lavigne will heal, but it will remember Marcel and Roland's moment of madness. She turned to the chateau's entrance, where Madame Lefebvre stood, her hands clasped, her face less pale than before, but still marked by the strain of recent days. Miss Marple approached her, her steps light on the gravel. "Madame Lefebvre," she said kindly, "you've been the heart of this house, seeing what others overlook. I suspect you knew more of Marcel's troubles than you said. Did he ever speak of Roland's grudge or his own fears?" The housekeeper's eyes flickered, and she nodded, her voice low. "He did, mademoiselle. Marcel knew Roland was desperate, said he'd gotten letters, offers to buy the land, veiled threats. I didn't think it would come to murder, but I saw Roland's anger at the inn, heard his boasts. I should have spoken sooner." Her hands twisted together, a gesture of quiet guilt. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, reassuring. "You spoke when it mattered, madame. In my village, a housekeeper once held the key to a mystery by noticing a misplaced teacup. Your words about Pierre's agitation, Etienne's digging, they helped light the way." She paused, her eyes softening. "Look after the chateau and those boys. They'll need your strength." Madame Lefebvre nodded, a tear glinting in her eye, and Miss Marple turned back to the inspector. "You've a fine village here, Inspector," she said. "Guard it well, and if you ever find yourself in St. Mary Mead, there's always a cup of tea waiting." Dubois chuckled, a rare sound from the stern man. "I may take you up on that, mademoiselle. Safe travels, and thank you." He offered a formal bow, then stepped back as Miss Marple climbed into the car, her movements as precise as ever. As the car rolled down the drive, Miss Marple gazed out at the vineyard, its vines swaying gently in the breeze. The case was closed, Roland's confession secured, yet her mind lingered on the small details, the housekeeper's unspoken fears, the village's whispers, the faint possibility of other secrets buried in the earth. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that no mystery was ever fully solved. There were always threads left dangling, waiting for another tug. The car reached the station, and she boarded the train, settling into a window seat with her knitting bag beside her. As the countryside rolled past, she drew out her needles, their familiar click a soothing rhythm. Her thoughts drifted to St. Mary Mead, to its quiet lanes and gossiping neighbors, where another puzzle might await. "People," she murmured to herself, "are never quite what they seem, but they're always human." With that, she turned her attention to her knitting, the train carrying her homeward, ready for whatever secrets the next village might hold.